We love having you with us. So today or the code word for today is rain. Okay, and there's a reason why I chose rain because I'm trying to channel this into the universe. So everybody just think rain because we need it so badly. So that's the code word for today. If you lose connection and you need to get back in, you're struggling getting back in, just email that code word to Gabby, and I will put her email address in the chat. Okay, so it will be in there, and you can just email her that, and she'll let you back in. If you have a Zoom name that is like iPhone or something like that, it's not your name, please let her know that because she won't be able to find you if you don't. So just let her know. Okay, also remember, if you want the CEUs, that link will go into the chat about 15 minutes before the end of the training, and we will keep the training open for another 15 minutes or so afterwards. So you got a good 30 minutes to grab that. You can click on it, fill it out, or you can copy it and paste it somewhere else and do it later, but just make sure that you get that evaluation and you fill that out before Friday, because then that's when we gather those all up. And the link will close at 5 o'clock on Friday, so make sure you do it before then. And then those CEUs will go out next week. Also, I just wanted to let everybody know, I know I've gotten contact or emails from people about the ethics and suicide prevention recordings. If you watch those particular recordings for this last training cycle, what am I trying to say? Licensure cycle, then you can get CEUs. For the other recordings, you can't, but for ethics and suicide prevention, anything we do within this licensure time, you can get CEUs for. And we've changed the way that you do that. So in those guidelines that I send out every month with the flyer, you'll see if you go down to the bottom in number 6, it talks about recordings, and you'll see how to do that. It's simpler now because you can watch the recording, you can go in to a link and fill that out, and it will send you the certificate. You don't have to wait for us to send it to you. So please read that, and it'll show you how to get that. I know some people have already watched the last ethics one and are trying to get their certificate for that. So if you have questions, let me know, but I think I've explained it pretty well, so it should be fine. Okay, I think I've covered the things I wanted to talk about. Let's get going. I want to introduce you to Hayley Leishman. I met Hayley because of another presenter that we had. If you were here for Jess Cleave's presentation, she's the one that told me about Hayley, and so put me in contact with her. And so we brainstormed, and we're so excited for this subject. It's going to be really good. We've kind of been chatting about it a little bit before, and so I'm really excited. She's got some good stuff, and she's very knowledgeable in this field, and I think really excited to talk to us about it and teach us. And so she's got a lot of acronyms after her name, which I'm very impressed by. She's got a lot of training, and she's in private practice up in Murray with Cliff Rose Therapy, if you've heard of that. So I'm going to turn the time over to Hayley, and with a lot of gratitude already for what you're about to teach us. So thanks, Hayley.
Great. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. I am really excited to be here today. And beyond being excited, honestly, I'm just really, really grateful to Kelly and her team for this opportunity to present this information today, because I do truly believe that what I have to share has the potential to change lives. And it's just awesome that all of you phenomenal therapists and counselors are exactly who can take this information out into the world and help those in our communities who are struggling with addiction. So let me see if I can go ahead and start sharing my screen. I have done many dress rehearsals on this, so let's see if I can do it seamlessly. Did I do it? We good? Okay. All right. So just a little bit, well, let me start this. Okay. I'm getting there. All right, so a little bit about me. I'm really passionate about helping people overcome addiction. I am in long-term recovery myself from alcohol and drug use, and in May I celebrated 13 years. Outdoor recreation was central to my recovery journey, and fly fishing in particular. We might have a little bit of time, and I'll touch on that as we get into this. I set out professionally to help others overcome addiction and finished my bachelor's degree, became a licensed recreation therapist, gained experience in a variety of settings from like acute psych, detox, the correction system, community mental health. But ultimately, I realized that if I was going to help people struggling with addiction, I needed to be able to work with their trauma. So went back to school, got my MSW, started working in a trauma and addiction focused residential treatment center for adults. We also treated compulsive sexual behavior. So that was absolutely incredible experience that really shaped me as a clinician. I'm a member of the International Institute for Trauma and Addiction Professionals, certified addiction therapist, and certified multiple addiction therapist. At the beginning of the year, I went out and started solo private practice where I specialize in working with adults struggling with compulsive sexual behavior and those with kind of complex addiction profiles as well as betrayal trauma. All right, so let's get started here. So our learning objectives today, basic understanding of the polyvagal theory and how addiction can be seen as an adaptive response to nervous system dysregulation, the role of trauma in nervous system dysregulation. What is addiction? So we'll talk about substance use and behavioral addictions, the understanding of for addiction neuropathways and substances and behaviors associated with each. We'll learn about addiction interactions and how they reinforce addiction neuropathways and can actually impede recovery efforts. We'll talk about some assessment strategies as well as polyvagal informed interventions. Holy moly, that's a lot. Whether you specialize in addiction or not, it shows up in our offices, right? And while it may be appropriate to refer to a specialist or a higher level of care, oftentimes it may not be necessary, appropriate, or even feasible. And you might actually be the best person to help them because you're the one with the relationship. But I know working with this population can definitely feel daunting and overwhelming. So really my ultimate hope for this presentation is that you'll be able to have more confidence in your skill set to be able to better understand your clients struggling with addiction and be able to provide meaningful, transformative, and evidence-based care, obviously working within the scope of your practice, right? Okay, so we have a lot to cover. And how I've done this is I've split the presentation up into two halves. We'll start with the polyvagal theory, and then about an hour in, we'll switch over to the addiction neuropathways, and I will leave time at the end of each of those for questions. Sound good? All right. And I also want to put it out there that I love connecting with other therapists and especially love talking about this stuff. So if you have questions that don't get answered, seriously, please feel free to reach out to me directly. And I'm not just saying that, like I totally welcome it. I think it would be great to connect. So, all right, here we go. All right, what is the polyvagal theory? So it was officially presented to the scientific community in 1994 by Dr. Stephen Porges. But actually he began this work in 1969, and I don't know why that feels like a really long time ago, but maybe it's because it was before I was born, so therefore it has to be a really long time ago. But it has been in the works, and it has been around for a while. I mean, granted, you know, in the whole grand scheme of things, it's a fairly young theory, but it does have some history behind it. In a nutshell, the polyvagal theory is an understanding of how the autonomic nervous system responds to cues of safety and danger. So I love this graphic here. This was actually drawn in 1543 by this anatomist, Andreas Vesalius. And while it is not entirely correct, this person did a really phenomenal job. And I love it because I feel like it does a good job depicting our autonomic nervous system and incorporates the vagus nerve, which is actually our 10th cranial nerve. And it's a bundle of nerves that journeys pretty much from our brainstem to our face, tons of nerves going into our face. our heart, lungs, stomach, and down into the intestines. All right. I love this quote. So, learning about the polyvagal theory is learning about the science of safety, the science of feeling safe enough to fall in love with life and take the risks of living. And when we think about our clients struggling with addiction, right, this is not their experience. And so this is where we're trying to get them, right, is to feel safe enough to like re-engage with life and take that risk of living. This quote is by Deb Dana. She's an LCSW. She's done a ton of really great work with Dr. Porges, adapting the polyvagal theory to clinical mental health treatment. So she's put out some great books, done some workshops. I'll share some of those books at the end, but just know I will be referencing her a lot as I go through this polyvagal theory section, and a lot of it is based on how she conceptualizes it. Okay. So the autonomic nervous system. So that's what we're talking about with the polyvagal theory. It's our autonomic nervous system. It is automatic. That's kind of how I remember that. It's beneath our conscious awareness, but can be influenced by conscious processes. That part is really important. So while this is something happening, we have no actual control over it, just doing it automatically. We can ultimately influence it cognitively through our conscious processes. It's always working, it's always engaged, but how it is working depends on if it detects cues of safety or danger. So throughout this presentation, I'm using these three graphics to represent the different nervous system states. And so as you see them, you'll know that this is what they correspond to. Deb Dana talks a lot about like really engaging our right brain when we're learning about the polyvagal theory in our nervous system, because it helps us conceptualize it better. It helps us to like befriend our nervous system if we can kind of associate colors, shapes, sensations, things like that with our nervous system. So we'll talk about that more when we get into the exercise that we're doing later. So our sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, that is under safety. So this is an important thing that we need to like distinguish. So our autonomic nervous system works in two ways, under threat or under safety. And so under safety, it's maintaining some sort of level of homeostasis. Our sympathetic is responsible for regulating our heart rate, our breathing, blood pressure, things like that. Under threat, however, if we detect danger, that is our fight or flight system, where we become mobilized for action. So we are mobilized to fight, mobilized to flight. And then we have the parasympathetic branch. Initially, this was thought of just a singular pathway, so hence the polyvagal part. It's actually two different pathways. We have the ventral vagal pathway and the dorsal vagal pathway. Our ventral vagal pathway is when we are in a state of safety. When our nervous system says, I am safe, all is well, we are calm, we are connected, our social engagement system is activated, and we're going to talk more about that. Super fascinating. But when we are under threat, we drop into either one of these other nervous system states. We either go into our sympathetic or our dorsal vagal. So the dorsal vagal pathway under safety it regulates our digestion. It's responsible for deep rest and restoration. But under threat, we are immobilized, we're shut down, we're numb. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so there are three organizing principles to the polyvagal theory that are kind of important to understand, like foundationally. The first one refers to hierarchy, and that actually refers to three different aspects of the polyvagal theory. So the first one is evolutionarily, it developed in a hierarchy, with the dorsal vagal being the most primitive. So that came online like 500 million years ago. Then the sympathetic developed 400 million years ago, and then the ventral is our most evolved nervous system state, and that developed 200 million years ago and is unique to mammals. So just mammals have a ventral vagal pathway. Hierarchy also refers to how it is activated in our nervous system. So the concept of a ladder is often used here to depict this with dorsal vagal at the bottom of the ladder, then moving up into sympathetic, then up into ventral. And so the way that it's activated, we have to, if you're in dorsal, you need to move through sympathetic before you can get to ventral. If you're in ventral, you're not just going to drop into dorsal. There will be some period of sympathetic activation first, followed by dorsal vagal. And then the third hierarchy is how it is organized in the body. So if we go back to this cool little graphic here, our ventral vagal, primarily the majority of the nerve endings there go into our face, into our eyes, our mouth, our ears, like very sensory oriented. Our sympathetic, a lot of the nerves are going into our heart and lungs. Granted, they do travel in other parts of our body, but that's kind of where the bulk of it is. And then our dorsal vagal, the bulk of those nerves are going to be found below the diaphragm. And often when I talk about this, I'm doing this because this is how I keep it organized. So if I'm talking about ventral, I might be doing things like this. Sympathetic, I do this. So, but it helps me keep straight of what's going on, right, in the body and where I'm talking about. Just helps it make sense for me. All right, so let's go back over here. So the next organizing principle of neuroception is, or sorry, polyvagal theory is neuroception. So that's our nervous system's data detector. So it is constantly running. It's always trying to detect, gather information. So it's looking for danger cues or safety cues. We can think of danger cues as triggers, right? These are things that kind of activate us, right? Our safety cues, Deb Dana calls them glimmers. So if we have enough danger cues, right, we can have a sympathetic or a nervous system state change. If we're in ventral, we detect danger, we drop into sympathetic, right? It's fight or flight, got to do something about this. But if we experience enough safety cues or glimmers, and she said, and there's actually research done on this, if we notice enough things in our environment that kind of can bring us a sense of safety, sometimes that's enough to actually influence a state change, to go from sympathetic up into ventral. Super fascinating. So all of this, though, is happening beneath our conscious awareness. 80% of the incoming data from our neuroception is coming from our body up into our brain, which is wild to think that our body is detecting so much information from our environment. And then 20% is actually going from our brain down into the body. An important aspect of this is story follows state. So we get triggered, get activated, we have a nervous system response. So that's all happening in our body. Below our conscious awareness, it's very, very, very fast. But then our brain has to make up a story about it, right? What do we do with that? We see we're out walking the kids, a dog comes running after and barking, right? Instantly going into that fight or flight. We're afraid, we're mobilized for action. But then the dog gets closer, like, oh yeah, that's Henry, neighbor's dog. And then the story comes online, sends the information back to the body. Okay, we're actually not in danger, we're safe. So story follow state, super important because this is how we can influence our nervous system to heal down the road. We'll get back to that. All right, and then the third organizing principle is co-regulation. And basically what that means is two or more nervous systems co-creating an experience of connection. So this is the foundation of safety. This is the foundation of a well-regulated nervous system. It is a biological impairment or imperative, and it's our precursor to attachment. So we need to be able to regulate with other human beings. It is just absolutely critical to our sense of safety. Okay, let's move on. This chart is in various forms, easily found, Googled on the internet. If you just Google like polyvagal chart, this will pop up. What I love about it is each one of our nervous system states actually corresponds to different things going on in our body, different physiological responses. So it covers all of that. The way that this is laid out is according to arousal. So we're calm when we're in our ventral vagal state. As we get aroused, we move into sympathetic. Arousal keeps going up, 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 up. We might hit a point of panic, and then the body says, no more, we are done. And we shut down and go into our dorsal vagal state. So this is just lots of great information on here, and we'll cover this in some way, shape, or form, but I just wanted to give this to you guys, share it with you just as a resource. I think it's just really helpful to kind of conceptualize what is happening in the body, what's happening into the mind, and our feelings, and just the whole experience of our nervous system. Just another way to conceptualize it. Okay, here we go. If you would like to do this exercise with us, I believe that Kelly emailed it out. It might be in the chat. I'm not sure. But go ahead and if you want to follow along, hopefully have a little bit of time at the end so that you can share like kind of your experience of working through this exercise, what it was like for you. But usually I do this in a group setting. And I usually do it after I've given quite a bit of psychoeducation on the polyvagal theory. But in the interest of time, we're going to learn and do simultaneously. So, which might actually be beneficial. We'll see. So if you have it handy, go ahead and pull it out. And ideally, if you have like colored pens or markers, go ahead and grab those. So let's see here. Like I said, I usually do it in a group setting, but you can certainly do it one-on-one. I think this is really helpful for clients. I mean, it's beyond really helpful. Like they report like this is changing for them because especially when we're dealing with addiction, our clients do not like to feel what's going on in their body. Like that is actually a very, really uncomfortable experience. And to be able to go through it this way really helps them have an understanding. It kind of externalizes it a little bit, helps them understand what's happening, gives them a language around it. It can be really validating for our clients to be able to see, oh, this is this chaotic thing that's going on in my body. Here it is. This is what's actually happening. So I have found this to be one of the more beneficial interventions to use with clients that really kind of lays the foundation of our work together. Because then as we start talking, incorporating the nervous system into our work, they can refer back to this and it just helps them really understand what's going on. And I mentioned this before, that Dana talks about befriending your nervous system. Like everything that our nervous system is doing is in service of our survival, right? It's doing what it's supposed to do. And I love that language just because, for our clients, they've been told for years that there's something wrong with them, right? And the polyvagal theory, I feel like, is very non-pathologizing and describes our body's natural drive to keep us safe. All right, so let's talk about the different sections on this. So each one of them corresponds to the different nervous system states. There's a section that's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, bodily sensations. So what I want you to do is, as we fill this out, use a color that corresponds in like your mind when you're thinking, okay, when I'm triggered, I'm in fight or flight, what kind of color can I associate that with? So use a color when you're filling this in that corresponds directly to that nervous system state. We'll go through these one at a time. But then you also want to fill out the world is. So when you're filling in that particular state, complete the sentence. The world is ... and I am ... On the far right, there's this over here, you can give it a name. What would you name your nervous system state when you're in sympathetic? What would you call that if you were to just cue it somehow with a name? What would it be? All right. So let's go ahead and jump in. So one thing that is really important when doing any of this type of work, like especially when we're trying to introduce the different states to our clients, is we always want to end in ventral, because as you will see as we go through this, just talking about these different nervous system states can bring a certain degree of activation to it. So we don't want to start in ventral and end in dorsal, because hopefully you guys will notice as we go through this, you kind of feel it. It's kind of heavy and icky, and it's like, whoa, that's a lot. So we always want to end in ventral. So we are going to start in sympathetic, go to dorsal, and then up in ventral. So just notice how you're feeling right now before we get started. Um, if you can identify what nervous system state you might be in at the moment, and just take a minute just to notice. All right. Because of the experiential nature of this exercise, if you do it like in a group setting, I would recommend saving it for groups that are in the norming or performing stage of group formation, as opposed to new groups that are still in that storming phase. Because if clients don't feel safe enough with each other, it will be really difficult for them to kind of travel this whole ladder effectively. All right, so let's talk about our sympathetic nervous system. So we can think of this as fight or flight, mobilized, anxiety, it's hyperarousal. In our body, our heart is racing. We might be experiencing shallow, rapid breathing, palpitations, might be sweaty, restless, jittery, like me right here in my seat. I've got a little bit of sympathetic activation going on right now because I'm really nervous, but also I'm still very much anchored in ventral just because I'm really excited and passionate about this. But I feel it. I'm feeling that sympathetic energy. Um, so when you're in that state, I want you to identify what feelings might you be feeling. So while there are kind of maybe some universal aspects to these different nervous system states, your experience is totally unique. So as you feel this out, not like what I don't want you to put what it should be or how you should be experiencing it, but what it's like for you. So what feelings might you feel when you are in fight or flight? So some examples are fear, we feel unsafe, anxious, worried, irritable, stressed. What behaviors might you be engaging in? So control is a big one, trying to just get a sense of control over the situation. Um, that fight instinct might kick in. We might display aggression, argue, fight. Definitely might use some avoidance or distraction. Could be pacing, definitely some hypervigilance, right? Can get really rigid in our thinking. And this is where we might start introducing addiction. So just take a moment if you're filling this out. I'll give you a second to kind of complete those boxes. And then what would you put for the world is and I am? All right, let's move into dorsal. So when we go into this nervous system state, this is our path of last resort. So um, this is very much like, this is the end of the line, right? I'm from a survival standpoint, our body is preparing us for death. Um, However, in modern society, right, we're not running from lions maybe like we used to, right, back in the old days. But dorsal vagal can be activated really in response to obviously chronic stress, chronic trauma, right? To the point where our body says no more and shuts us down. But it can also be activated in response to an ego threat, or to shame. So shame is a really fascinating emotion because it has a very strong physiological response to it. And you can be in your ventral vagal, hanging out with friends, everything's fine, and then someone might say something that kind of catches you, and it triggers maybe one of your shame triggers. And next thing you know, right, you are You might feel defensive, that sympathetic comes online. You might want to, make a snarky comment back, but ultimately it will pull us right down into dorsal vagal, where we want to get small, hide, shut down, withdraw. So in our body, when we go into this state, there's definitely a decreased heart rate. There's decreased facial expression and eye contact. Our body temperature is going to decrease. We're immobilized. And this is really fascinating. Our endogenous opioids kick in. So, like, there's actually this whole system that is happening that allows us to dissociate and numb out. Feelings that we might be experiencing are loneliness, shut down, hopeless, trapped, definitely disconnected, worthless, shame. And behaviors, dissociation, isolation, excessive sleep, immobilization, low to no motivation, low agency, and then addiction again. So I think clinically, when we see clients that are, chronically in this state, what it would look like, right, is a pretty severe depression. So that's kind of how we could recognize that. So take a moment, fill out whatever you have left on your paper. Be sure to give it a name. And just being here, can you feel it? Like there is an intensity, there's a heaviness to it. Just even talking about it. All right. So let's move up into ventral. So this is our most evolved nervous system state. Again, like I said, it's unique to mammals. There is this social engagement system that is associated with ventral vagal. That is very much all those nerves that going into your face. That's part of our social engagement system, and it's how we connect to others, right? Primarily through our facial expressions, speech, tone of voice, eye contact. It enhances our ability to listen, to pick up on emotional nuances. It is through the social engagement system that we connect with others and feel safe. So really fascinating, but the minute we get triggered and drop into sympathetic or into dorsal, this becomes inactive. So our ability to connect is significantly impacted when we are in a survival state. So a key aspect of ventral vagal is that it helps reduce our defensiveness. That does lead to sympathetic or dorsal vagal activation. So there is kind of a protective factor. The more that we're in ventral, and you can also think of it as our window of tolerance, right? The more we're able to access, the more that we're in that, the more like resilience we have against kind of getting stuck in those other nervous system states. A well-regulated nervous system is not always in ventral though. Like this is not the goal. The goal is not to just always be in this place, right? A well-regulated nervous system can move fluidly between all the states. But always is anchored in ventral, can return to ventral with, to a certain degree, like a minimal amount of effort. From an IFS perspective, ventral is our self-led energy, right? So our feelings of being calm, connected, compassionate, confident, creative, curious, content, all those wonderful C's, right? Those are some feelings that you might be experiencing when you're in ventral. In general, we're just regulated. Our breathing is rhythmic. Our digestion is working well. We're able to focus. We're attentive. And then our behaviors, right? We're open to connection. We can laugh, play. We find pleasure in activities. We can access maybe some sort of spiritual connection as well. So I'll give you a minute just to complete your sheet there. All right, and then I just want to kind of make just a final note on blended states. So it's possible for our nervous system for the different states to be blended together. So sympathetic blended with ventral could be things like play, where we need that sympathetic activation. We need to be mobilized, but we need to also be connected and engaged. Um, so play, sports, things like that. Ventral blended with dorsal would look like kind of the sense of calm and safety that you would need to maybe engage in intimacy or meditation. And then our blended states of dorsal and sympathetic is that's our freeze state. And so while freeze feels immobilized, it's actually a combination of sympathetic activation. So think of having so much energy in your muscles, right, that you're tense and frozen in place. So it's a very mobilizing energy and the inability to do anything about it. So that's what our freeze state is. All right. I can tell that I have been nervous because I am just zipping right on through here. Sorry, guys. I'm feeling better though. Um, so let's talk about trauma in the nervous system. Uh, the brain and the nervous system experience fundamental changes to how they function in response to trauma. So trauma wires a person to heightened awareness and sensitivity to danger cues. So to the point of a cue mismatch, which means that cues of safety are now perceived as dangerous. So our clients that have, been exposed to, ongoing trauma, childhood trauma, systemic trauma, all the traumas that I've listed over here on the right of this slide, this has a fundamental impact in how the nervous system operates. And so kind of what this ends up looking like is an inability to really access that ventral vagal state and being stuck either in a state of chronic sympathetic activation or chronic dorsal vagal activation, or just vacillating between the two. Um, and and folks that are in this place, they struggle to see like true safety cues as being safe. So safe people are now perceived as dangerous. And so it is really difficult for them to ever get a true sense of safety to be able to begin regulating their nervous system in a healthy way again. And so they're just really chronically dysregulated because ventral is just so impossible to access. So that's where we come in. Um, so I've listed this list of traumas, certainly not exhaustive, but it does give an idea of all the ways in which our clients can be traumatized. So we've got our childhood trauma, um, our adverse childhood experiences, neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, insecure attachment. Then our systemic trauma, discrimination, racism, poverty, healthcare disparity, community violence, chronic stress, so complex PTSD, interpersonal violence, workplace stress, injury, illness, poverty, intergenerational trauma, so colonization, slavery, systemic trauma, epigenetics. And then our big T traumas like our PTSD, rape, assault, accidents, natural disasters, medical trauma, birth trauma. So there's there's a lot. There's a lot to being a human, right? Okay, let's go ahead and move into, let's come back to this. Um, I'm curious if any of you would like to share your experience with this exercise. And just unmute yourself. Somebody, anybody?
I can say something.
Great.
I and maybe it's because I've been in the sympathetic and the dorsal for a while.
Mm,
But writing about it, like I'm having a hard time coming back to that ventral vagal of having peace and things. I'm feeling very, I guess I'm more in the sympathetic, like very much fight or flight, very much like I'm having a hard time slowing my breathing. And it's
yeah.
just interesting, but I've also had a lot of things lately where this is where I've been staying. And so it's been, I don't know, this is a good reminder of, like of maybe like searching out more social engagement.
Mm,
And maybe, and I've had the thought about a lot about gratitude and gratitude being um, a very important part of all of this.
mhm.
So yeah, that was me.
Yeah. Well, thank you seriously so much for sharing that and being vulnerable. Um, and just acknowledging that. And your nervous system's probably giving you this gentle reminder, like, hey, we have a lot on our plate right now. There's a lot of stuff going on. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I don't know, maybe me going into, going through the exercise and then going back to trauma and all the ways in which, we can be activated, right? Probably didn't help that process. So maybe for future, I'll leave that slide maybe for the beginning and then go into this. But yeah, thank you for sharing.
Well, and I don't think it was your fault. Like, I don't think it was just the trauma thing. I think it's been more like where I've been at. So no, I don't know, whatever you think.
Yeah, so I love what you're saying about seeking out more social connection because sometimes that's like all we can do. Um, and and we'll get to this as we move through the presentation, but our biggest intervention that we have to offer our clients um, is our own well-regulated nervous system, but also the nervous system of other trustworthy people potentially in their lives. So whether that is community, groups, things like that, but seeking out that connection is kind of a way to get a sense of safety, even if just for a brief moment when you're in that safe space with other people. Like you can borrow their nervous system. Any other thoughts?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Um, when you have someone who um, is going at a very fast pace, their nervous system is it feels like they're in sympathetic, but they're doing it to dissociate from kind of those feelings or the traumas of the past. Where would you put that in this concept? Does that make sense?
Kind of. So what if let me rephrase and see if I'm hearing you correctly. So basically you're saying you've got someone who's got, a lot of trauma history and basically they're kind of using that aroused energy as a way to kind of escape that. That is exactly where we're going. So when we get into the addiction neuropathways, that is exactly where we're going with this. So thank you for that. Do you mind just sitting tight and seeing if we answer that when we get there? Okay, thank you. All right. And with that, we have time right now. We can go ahead and move into questions. So let's do it.
I have one that's in the chat.
Okay. Let's see. Let me pull up the chat.
I think I've got it here. If you want me just to read it. She also has it in the Q&A. So, is betrayal trauma considered chronic stress, especially if behaviors from the spouse, such as pornography addiction and gaslighting or lying, is unknown to the betrayed spouse?
So I would answer yes, absolutely. Even if it is unknown, our nervous system knows. Remember, we've got the little detectors going on, constantly scanning for information. And though we may not consciously know why something's off, our nervous system knows something's off. So hopefully that answers your question, but I would say yes. Let's see, I see a question. Can you share more about borrowing from someone else's nervous system? How do we do that? We just show up. We just go be with them. Go be in proximity, share space with somebody who does have a regulated nervous system. For someone who is in ventral. This is one thing that I loved about working in residential treatment and being able to do the group work that we did, is, you know, so many clients would come in so dysregulated, but then once we kind of get into that group, we start feeling safe with each other. It kind of would elevate the whole energy of the group into a more regulated space. Even though it was far from ideal, you know, life is still falling apart. There's still all sorts of things that they're navigating. It was still possible to create that sense of safety, and be able to like feel that, share that, experience that together. So yeah, we just got to show up. Just be willing.
I have another question, if I might. So, when we come to talking specifically about addiction treatment, there is, for a lot of historical literature, maybe for example, R&R's risk need responsivity measures that kind of tell us and guide us about the potential for reoffending some of our clients might have. And then we're supposed to use that to guide some of our treatment, to address like antisocial personality, antisocial factors, or things like that. And I wanted to know if and how that it's almost CBT-esque focus fits into this trauma lens, or if they're quite divergent. Maybe, for example, you know, if I was to approach a group and I take on this focus that I've mentioned, I might be working with a client on having the group kind of create a space of pointing out cognitive errors and thinking errors and things like that. But I feel like from this perspective, we're much more about increasing felt safety and then allowing the brain to come to that more adaptive response as you increase that felt safety. What is your experience with these potentially divergent worlds in the therapeutic field, and how did you address them?
So I think they're both important. So like I mentioned at the beginning, we have to bring in that cognitive piece at the end to kind of move this forward, move the story in a different direction. Otherwise, it's really hard to get out of that stuck dysregulation. So I do think it's absolutely still beneficial. It's still useful. But I will say, I think it's really hard to cognitively override our nervous system if we don't establish a sense of safety first. Okay. There was someone who had their hand raised.
Adriana, yeah.
Yes, you know, some people isolate being the internet all the time or video games because they don't have real contact with people, watching TV all day long, and they feel like I have connection. So sometimes I have to be careful because when we talk about social life, they talk about their friends, but truly they are not friends because they are not there and they're just playing a game whenever they want to. So it's a way for them to control how much activity you have with these people. So sometimes there's a barrier when I try to convince them, well, like we have to look for real friends, people that you can interact, that you can depend on, and they can depend on you. So kind of interdependent. So that's one thing that I have found and I practice, that many times they feel like, well, I have friends, I have connections. This is working for me. watching
Right.
TV all day long or playing video games all day long. So that's a barrier that sometimes we have to face. How do we
Yeah, and
get into?
yeah, and I wouldn't discount the value of like internet connections, because there is still connection there. Like my daughter's very much into, video gaming and stuff, and she does connect to these people. Like they have like really rich lives, like they know about each other and what's going on in their day-to-day activities. So I wouldn't like totally dismiss that as being, because it's online or whatever, that it doesn't have the value of social connection, but definitely encouraging our clients, right, to try and have some sort of interactions with people in real life can definitely be beneficial, especially when we're talking about dysregulated nervous systems. Let's see. Is that we good? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't tell them just throw everything away, but they spend 16 hours in the internet.
Yeah.
So
Don't give that yourself too much, does that?
Uh-oh. We have somebody not muted.
So that is, they don't have any other real friendship because they don't even know who they are talking to. And when I work with teenagers, sometimes they're being groomed, giving, oh, I'm your friend, I'm your friend, but they don't really know who this person is, never met her. And so that is sometimes I have like, okay, it's great that you have that distraction, but we need to find real people.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol Lee.
Yeah, sorry if you can see me, I'm outside. What I was gonna say is more of a kind of a comment or observation. So somebody had the question about kind of like sharing your regulation, being regulated around somebody, and it try to help to induce that in others. And I do a lot of work with horses and clients or dogs and clients, and it's fascinating to watch how the animals respond to that. So one thing I'll do with clients is try to get them to kind of induce calmness in themselves to try to help the horse's anxiety. And so it's a mirror. They can see what's happening. And so you don't always feel calm, but you have to pretend it that way sometimes until your body starts doing that more naturally without having to fight it as much. And other things, just being in, like right now, I'm just walking and being outside, watching the trees and paying attention to stillness versus movement and just observing those kind of just symbols around us. I think that's a really, I don't know, in my experience, powerful interventions with people to help them regulate by kind of joining with natural things around them. Even just going and sitting next to a flower and looking at the flower and noticing how it's shaped and what it's doing, you can try to kind of regulate your nervous system with that living object.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Any other questions?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat. But
All right. Awesome. Well, let's keep going then. Woo. Now to the addiction piece. All right. Let's see here. I guess I need to share my screen again, huh? Do I need to do that? Yes, I do need to do that. All right. Did I do it? Okay. I am going to be pro by the time we're done with this. All right. What is addiction? So lots of things. This first definition by Jan Winhall, she says it helps you in the short term, hurts you in the long term, and you can't stop doing it. I love it. So simple, to the point. I will say Jan Winhall has done some amazing work, specifically with the polyvagal theory and addiction. She has developed what's called the felt sense polyvagal model. So if this is like something that you're really interested in and want more training around, definitely recommend that. You can find it through the Polyvagal Institute. A great program, great way to work with our clients struggling with addiction through this model. And then we have this other definition by researchers Harvey Milkman and Stanley Sunderworth. Self-induced changes in neurotransmission that result in problem behaviors. So kind of what I like about this is the self-induced part. I like how it's brought on the brain component of it, and then the result of that, the problem behaviors. And then finally, we have our lovely ASAM, who is kind of our authority, right, on what we say is or is not addiction. They say that addiction is a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experiences. People with addiction use substances or engage in behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. I really actually love this definition. First of all, because it leads with hope. It's treatable, but it also acknowledges the complex interactions among brain circuits, so our neural pathways. And it acknowledges, right, our trauma, our lived experience, the environment that we're in. And then finally, just because of the work that I do, and you'll see why this is so important, but it also incorporates the behavior component, that people with addiction can engage in behaviors that become compulsive. All right. So then I wrote my own definition.
When you're looking at this lizard, try to feel like, do you know what this animal is? I'm curious if there's any nerds out there who know what this animal really is.
Sorry.
I was hoping I heard the M word. The monitor word. Does anyone know what a monitor lizard is?
Do you guys have a way to mute everybody?
Yes, yes.
There we go. Okay, thank you. All right, so this is kind of how I conceptualize addiction. The compulsive use of substances or behaviors as a means to regulate the autonomic state, often subconsciously as a way to feel safe. It is a form of artificial nervous system regulation that does not actually result in a true sense of safety, primarily because connection is absent. And then finally, just one last note on this. This is on behavioral addictions. So this is again from Milkman and Sunderworth. And I will be talking about them a lot because they wrote this really huge textbook-like thing on basically our natural drive to pursue pleasure and how that can be easily hijacked, right? So I will be referencing them a lot. But I love this quote. Any stress-reducing activity, whether ingesting a psychoactive substance, eating junk food, or gambling excessively, may be subject to compulsive overuse and the escalating consequences of loss of control. In fact, the disease concept may be applied to the entire spectrum of compulsive problem behaviors. The distinction between internally and externally induced alteration of mood, thought, or behavior is arbitrary and misleading. Activities that evoke sensations of arousal, satiation, or fantasy bring about alterations in brain chemistry and patterns of compulsive behavior, much like the symptoms traditionally associated with psychoactive substances. So whether I experience, right, a heightened sense of euphoria from adding new items to my shopping cart and clicking buy, right, or I experience euphoria by having a couple of drinks, the neurochemical mechanisms, right, are very similar. And as you will see going forward in this presentation, there is a lot of interplay between behaviors and substances that reinforce neural pathways of addiction. So as clinicians, we have to be looking at the big picture. All right. So addiction neural pathways. So in simple terms, a neural pathway is the biochemical route a neurochemical takes to activate the brain. So it's this. So we have some sort of biochemical neurotransmitter, something that goes in here and it travels through all these parts of our brain. And then something happens, we have like a mood change, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about an addiction neural pathway. If you were hoping that we were just going to like really cover a bunch of slides that look like this. We're not, because that's just way more than I can handle. But just know that this is what we're talking about, that there is a corresponding graphic that looks like this to everything that I am talking about from here forward. But we're not talking about it in terms of what's happening necessarily, like the route that the chemical takes and all the different brain structures. We're more looking at it from like the behavior perspective. Like, what does this actually look like? I kind of a side note, I was able to do, as part of my multiple addiction therapist training, I was able to do a training with Dr. Kevin McCauley. And I don't know, for those of you like in the addiction space here in Utah might be familiar with his work. He's really been influential here, really across the board, just on with his work on the neuroscience of addiction, but he's also been really involved in the addiction recovery community here in Utah. But this is his thing, right? And so in this training, it was 8 hours with Dr. Kevin McCauley. I was really excited to do this training, but it was it was over 500 slides that looked like this. So as a social worker, right, my poor brain was like, I don't know what just happened. So we're going to simplify this, but just know this is what we're talking about. All right. Yeah, so basically, if our clients are compulsively using a substance or compulsively engaging in a behavior that alters their mood, an addiction neuropathway is at work. All right, in this picture, so the addiction neuropathway versus my barn pathway. So in this picture is the trail that cuts through a pasture, and it connects my house to my barn. And this trail was not here when we bought our property, and our barn is back here behind these juniper trees. So it's been about 8 years and many feet traveling back and forth on this trail. It can now be seen from space using Google Earth, which is kind of wild. What I also think is really wild is the fact that it's not straight. It kind of meanders. We clearly mosey to and from the barn. Even when it's covered in snow, you can see that indentation of the trail. And I would imagine that after like several years of maybe leaving the trail alone, it would probably eventually be reclaimed by the grass and alfalfa from the pasture, right? But the worn rut would remain, and probably just in a short time, a few trips across the path, right, it would emerge again. And so I use this analogy to kind of explain like what an addiction neuropathway is. The more it gets used, the deeper and stronger the pathway becomes. And so in recovery, the goal is to stop using the pathway. We need to find a healthier way to get to the barn. For me, this trail quite literally is the easy way to the barn. In the last few years, I've started taking the long way around. So there's a road that goes around the property to get to the barn because I'm trying to be healthy. I'm trying to get my steps in. But I'm not going to lie, that shortcut across the field is super tempting, especially when it's snowing or I'm tired or I'm rushed. And it's crazy how my brain, one trip across that, and I'm like, ooh, I just did that and fed in less than 20 minutes. I'm like, the next day, it's like, I could just take the shortcut. And I was like, no, we got to go back around the long way. So you can think of recovery kind of in the same way. We abstain, we find sobriety, we engage in new behaviors, and the addictive pathway goes quiet. But meanwhile, we create other healthier pathways to get to the barn. But the old addictive pathway will never fully disappear. So much like a few trips down the trail, a few drinks with friends, the pathway quickly reappears because it was there all along. All right. So we all have in common a desire to feel good. That desire is universal to human experience. We are wired to feel good. The researchers Milkman and Sunderworth say that we are compelled by repetitious urges to become energized, to relax, and to imagine. And thus, these are the 3 citadels of consciousness that are the beacons of compulsive behavior. So these urges, right, to be energized, to relax, to imagine, taken to the point, right, of compulsivity, to the point of negative consequences, to the inability to quit, and we have an addiction. You know who else has figured out these innately human desires? Marketing companies, right? This is the whole premise for any marketing out there is based upon these urges, right? To be energized, to relax, to imagine. So, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of what follows with all of this comes from Harvey Milkman and Stanley Sunderworth, as well as Dr. Patrick Carnes. He's really the one that kind of labeled these as addiction neuropathways. And he added this fourth component of deprivation. So we're really going to jump into these in depth. But I want to make just a quick note on differential diagnosis. Like these neuropathways are also utilized by neurodivergent folks and are not always representative of addiction, though there is considerable overlap, and our neurodivergent clients are at greater risk for addiction. So if you see these pathways being used in a heightened or compulsive way, just please always consider the presence of ADHD, autism, OCD, and make sure that you're getting a proper screening and diagnosis. Because at their core, though, these are still nervous system regulation strategies, but there are some nuances, right, to how these are treated if both neurodivergence and addiction are present. So beyond the scope of today's presentation, but I will say that most of my clients are neurodivergent, which I think is interesting. All right, our 4 types of addiction neuropathways. So the first one is arousal, which is all about pleasure and intensity. The second is numbing, which the goal is to reduce stimulation from the internal or external world. The third is fantasy, so escape from reality. And then the fourth is deprivation, where control is the goal, and that's often intertwined with the other 3 neural pathways. All right, so as we go through each of these addiction neural pathways, I want you guys to be thinking about the survival nervous system states of sympathetic and dorsal vagal activation. So be thinking about what substances or behaviors that could fit within this pathway and what nervous system state a client might be trying to regulate by utilizing that behavior or substance. So the first 2 that we talk about, I think, are really obvious, more so than the last 2. So this first one is the arousal neural pathway. So again, this is all about achieving pleasure and intensity. This pathway is energizing. It is activating. And so stimulant drugs like amphetamines and cocaine can be used to activate this pathway. But then again, we've got behaviors like gambling, shoplifting, high-risk sex, anything to do with violence. It is not uncommon for people who utilize this pathway to be in a chronic state of dorsal vagal shutdown. So this goes to, I forgot, the gentleman that asked the question earlier about, the folks that use like kind of this energetic arousal, like this just heightened energetic state to avoid the trauma. Like that is literally what this is all about. It's a way to regulate that chronic shutdown, that despair of being in dorsal vagal, and kind of forcing, like artificially pulling that nervous system out of that shutdown place and into a hyper aroused, pleasurable, excited state. All right, let's keep going. So then we have the numbing neural pathway. So this is completely the opposite of the other one. This is all about satiation. It produces a relaxing, calming, and sedating analgesic effect in the brain. So our substances like alcohol, heroin, benzodiazepines, behaviors like compulsive porn and masturbation, overeating, mindless scrolling, gambling. This neural pathway is typically used to manage chronic anxiety or sympathetic activation. So for our folks that are just constantly on overdrive, right, there's a really good chance that they're using substances or behaviors that bring that intensity, bring that activation down. And again, the goal is, right, because this is too intolerable, and this is how we feel safe. Okay. And then we have the fantasy neuropathway. So the goal here is to escape reality. So at the core of this neuropathway, the client finds their real life, their real identity, their reality is just too much to bear. So easy to see this, right, with hallucinogens like LSD and ecstasy, but also behaviors like compulsive romance seeking, compulsive video game use, and gambling. Notice that I've mentioned gambling in all 3 slides, just as an example that you could use any substance and any behavior in any one of the pathways. And so it's completely and totally unique to the client. And really our only way to know, like, okay, what are you accomplishing by engaging in this behavior is we have to ask. Like, we have to really get familiar with what is going on with their nervous system and how this behavior or this substance is helping them regulate. So many clients that utilize this pathway describe learning how to escape into fantasy at a really young age. So I think more than the other neural pathways, I think you can really see the connection to trauma in this pathway. Just because there is very much like this, an escape component to it. And also when we think about dorsal vagal shutdown, like there's so much kind of hopelessness, despair, isolation associated with it that it is kind of a natural progression once we get so far down into dorsal that our way out of it is to dissociate or to escape into some sort of fantasy world. And that makes a lot of sense too, because when you're in that place, you're so immobilized that pretty much all you can do, right, is to escape in some way. But you could also see this as an avoidance strategy or a distraction or relief from the intensity, right, and anxiety of the sympathetic state. All right, and then we go into the deprivation neuropathway. So at the core of this neuropathway is control. It is responsible for the binge purge cycles that are legendary in alcoholism, sexual acting out, and gambling. And obviously we see this with eating disorders. Oftentimes clients struggling with any compulsive or out of control behavior will use some form of deprivation to achieve a sense of control. So a client that may feel out of control with their sexual behavior may engage in anorexic spending to achieve a sense of control. They could be out of control with alcohol, but maybe anorexic with their eating. And so while this neural pathway is often seen as like the purge process of the binge purge cycle, it can stand alone as its own neural pathway as an endorphin mediated experience. So it can actually create states of euphoria and superiority. So if you've ever worked with somebody who does kind of engage in like this really like extreme deprivation, quite often like they do have a sense of pride and a sense of superiority over others because of their ability to maintain such a strong sense of control. Let's see here. Clients experiencing chronic states of sympathetic activation or high anxiety will often seek control in some aspect of their life or really any aspect, right, that they can. On the flip side, clients experiencing dorsal vagal will often describe feeling deeply insufficient, worthless, not enough, and compulsive deprivation may feel like the solution. And actually, I think I want to stop here and take questions just because that's a lot of information in 4 slides. So let's take questions just for a minute just to make sure we're all on the same page before I move on. Anybody?
I actually have a question, if that's okay. I just was thinking about, especially that last one, the deprivation one, and talking about how it's the control. Because we see, especially here at the Children's Justice Center, we work with children who have been abused and control has been taken away. And we talk a lot about that and different behaviors that may look strange, but it's really about trying to take control over again. So that's you know, that's what I'm wondering, is that what you're talking about? Is when it's been taken away, they're trying to gain it again?
Absolutely. Could
Yeah.
be.
And could that be something like exercising, or, you know, to an extreme, or that type of a thing? It looks healthy, but it's not, you know?
Right. Yeah, and to that, it is really tricky when we start talking about behaviors, because there are plenty of behaviors that are absolutely healthy and normal that we should be engaging in. And we just have to watch, especially when we're dealing with someone that has developed these addiction neural pathways, that these behaviors don't get taken to a point of compulsivity. Any other questions before we move on? All right, then let's keep going.
Can I just say one thing briefly, actually?
Yep.
I like that the deprivation talking about like sense of control, because I think as clinicians it can be helpful to again like discuss self-care and ways to gain a sense of control to establish safety, and to help talk about it in terms of, and help your clients kind of process and talk about it in terms of, why am I doing this? It's okay to want control and have control over things you can have. And are you doing it out of like trying to fix that you're not enough? Or are you doing it out of like trying to do it out of self-care and I am enough and this is how I care for myself? So I just wanted to mention that.
I love it. Yes. Thank you. All right. Let's keep going. Okay, I mentioned this earlier, kind of, sort of, but I really want to reinforce this, that clients, maybe I didn't mention it, may have one primary neural pathway or multiple. Generally, with those first three we discussed, there will be a deprivation component that will come online at some point, just depending. And actually, I think maybe right now, because we do have time, I'm going to share what this looks like from my own experience, since I can talk about me as opposed to, you know, risking violating client confidentiality. So this is what it looked like for me in my nervous system and my addiction neural pathways. So my default state for as long as I can remember was always sympathetic. Like, I was a very worried child, an anxious child. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in southern Utah on a piece of property with my grandparents living next door, which I always thought that was like really super cool. Like, how many kids have that? Obviously in adulthood now I'm realizing like how isolating that was, not having neighborhood kids to play with. So I did spend a lot of time in fantasy, and just kind of created, like, I created friends, I created a neighborhood, I created like activities, and really it was just a way to just cope, right, with intense loneliness. And so my introduction to substances was LSD. And that was at 16 years old, shortly after my dad and my grandfather unexpectedly passed away within just a couple of weeks of each other. And so doing LSD, that fantasy piece, I was gone and I loved it. Perfect, effective way, right, for me to escape reality. Then time goes on, right? My addiction kind of progresses. Alcohol came on board, which makes sense that alcohol was not part of the fantasy neural pathway. It was very much that numbing pathway. Entered disordered eating, Xanax, being out of control sexually. So my two primary neural pathways were numbing and fantasy. I would use alcohol to activate both of those pathways. Like, initially, alcohol could like bring my anxiety down, but then I was very much like a bar drinker, and I would get there and it was all about escaping my reality. Like, never mind the fact that I was actually a single mom and had two little kids at home. You know, I was going to the bar like to really live this alternate reality that was so far removed from who I really was. And So that's, that kind of shows how alcohol served both neuropathways. And ultimately, all of it was really just a way to manage, right, my hyperaroused nervous system. So then I get sober from substances, and I turn to fly fishing, right? Super healthy, powerful. It was incredibly soothing to my nervous system. Like through this lens, it makes so much sense why fly fishing was the thing that helped me get sober. But also it's the ultimate escape from reality too, and also very relaxing. And it was great. It helped me get sober. But I didn't like the obsession and preoccupation that I started to have with it. And I was like, whoa, this is weird. I'm not a fan of how I'm using this. And of course, I really wanted to, because at this point I was getting super into understanding addiction. And so I wanted to figure out why fly fishing was having the effect it was having and how I could access that like in a normal way and not on the river, right? So I did research, found out really it was ultimately about the mindfulness associated with fly fishing. And so then I started actively working on other ways to try and soothe my nervous system. But then the biggest hurdle that I've had to navigate in this whole process, right, was enter the deprivation neuropathway that came online after I'd been sober for quite some time. And I became very sexually anorexic. And that deprivation pathway was just so alive and well. And I was really fortunate to find a great therapist who understood all of this, was able to kind of help me navigate that one. And really, since then, it's just been, my recovery journey has just been all about keeping all of my behaviors in check, everything in moderation, and just always like, what is the healthy way for me to get to the barn? So that's kind of what the interplay, right, of all the different neural pathways, what it might look like. And hopefully you can see from that, and we'll talk about this more, how we have to be looking at the bigger picture. Like just to address the substance piece alone is not enough. Oh, I didn't mention on this, I was also using food. That was a huge part. The disordered eating was a huge part of like when I was in active addiction. But then I had learned, right, that if I overeat, I can numb and I can pass out and I'm fine. And that was a healthy thing to do as opposed to, right, going to the bar. And so I had to rein that one in too. So it's just constantly reining all the things in and keeping them in moderation. All right. Back to this slide. So in terms of recovery, it may be more important to know which neural pathways are involved than which addiction is being used to access it. And this is because knowing the neural pathway reveals the internal problem. Perfect. To me, this is really helpful. It can feel like a lot when we start getting just super hyper focused on one substance or behavior. But if we look at the whole big picture, then we kind of understand, okay, this is what's going on here. And then this last quote by Dr. Judith Grisel, she says, while in the end, there may be as many different paths to addiction as there are addicts, there are general principles of brain function that underlie all compulsive use. So I love this, just really speaks to all the different ways in which we can engage in, compulsive use. And that really, at the end of the day, it's the same pathways in the brain are being utilized. On that, this book right here, so this is Judith Grisel's book. She is also a person in recovery. She decided after she got sober that she wanted to figure out why the heck did I just do all of this in my life, and became a neuroscientist. Like, wow, super ambitious, but kudos to her for being able to do that. And then wrote this book, Never Enough, which really talks about like the experience of addiction from a memoir perspective, right? As well as what is going on within the brain for the different types of substances. I think it's a phenomenal book for clients and family members to understand what is happening at the brain level with addiction. She has it on audiobook and she reads it and she has a lovely voice. So it's a great listen. Okay, let's keep going. All right, let's talk about addiction interactions. So when the addiction interaction is also, you may have heard the phrase cross addiction or addiction transfer. So that's what we're talking about with addiction interactions. So addiction interactions refer to how the addictive use of substances and or behaviors affect each other on a neurochemical level, leading to distinct molecular changes in the brain that differ from those caused by a single substance or behavior alone. So these interactions strengthen the brain's addictive neural pathways. And this goes beyond just having, like, let's say we've got, you know, the arousal pathway going and the fantasy pathway going. This is also, it has a compounding effect. So it actually amplifies the addiction, making it stronger and more powerful. And I will say, in my experience, hands down, this is the single most important concept in working with addiction, particularly with substance use, because rarely does a singular addiction exist. And we could really have a whole other presentation just discussing the different types of addiction interactions. But really the important thing that I want you guys to know is that addictions do interact with each other, and those interactions kind of become like their own addiction and become part of the addiction neural pathway. Dr. Patrick Carnes, who's done a ton of work as far as in research-wise in the field of compulsive sexual behavior, he says that the synapses of the brain parallel other domains of nature in which energy flows. Like rivers that flow in parallel and then join together, the neural pathways of addiction will form a larger confluence of electrochemical energy. These connections will be deeper, wider, and swifter. So I love this image of the river where we've got two paths coming together. That's really what we're talking about with addiction interactions, is it really kind of compounds to make kind of a whole separate addictive process going on. A well-researched example of this is the convergence of nicotine and substance use disorder. So there's been a pretty significant longitudinal study of more than 34,000 adults. So that's pretty significant, that looked at the relapse rate between those who quit smoking when in recovery from substance use disorder and those who continued smoking. And the relapse rates were twice as high at the end of 3 years for those that continue to smoke than those that didn't. So powerful. And this is like a whole thing in the treatment world, residential treatment, on whether or not to let your clients smoke or not smoke, but we won't get into that. But if you find a treatment center that removes nicotine from the process and has them quit that as well as the other substances, this is why. The clients don't like it though. All right. So why do clients relapse despite solid recovery efforts? So you'll often hear that relapse is part of the recovery process, and it can be. Doesn't have to be, but it definitely can be. But what about our clients that are regularly relapsing? Like they are going to residential treatment, then they step down to PHP, they go into IOP, they get a sponsor, they're working their program, but they just can't seem to sustain any traction. Like what is going on for them? Historically, addiction treatment, right, has focused primarily on substances and usually only on the addiction with the most risk to the client. Rightfully so, makes sense. There's like this old school mantra that says, treat only one addiction at a time. You'll often hear that still with the old timers in the AA rooms. And while it's necessary to initially focus on substances, right, and particularly if they're using a substance causing significant harm to their life, that is just the beginning of the process, right? We don't stop there. We have to keep going. And I think this is kind of an area where there is a ton of opportunity to support clients in their long-term recovery journey after they leave treatment. So like we can support them definitely in general outpatient therapy, through support groups, group therapy, and within the community. And definitely like as, I don't know, I'm seeing just more commercial insurance companies like providing the bare minimum for substance use treatment, and then now with potential massive cuts coming to Medicaid, like I'm really nervous for what the future of addiction treatment will look like. And I think we're really going to have to just collectively step up to the plate to provide more avenues for helping these clients, because it is difficult to get the true depth of care that they need to sustain long-term sobriety. So why do they relapse? We need to be looking at the big picture and address addiction interactions and the presence of multiple addictions and addictive behaviors. We need to identify which addiction neuropathways are at work and all the ways that they are activated. So relapse is very difficult to avoid if the addictive neuropathway is still active in some way. This is really important. When dealing with substances, abstinence is ideal, and I will say big, huge and harm reduction may be necessary and still can be very beneficial. But ideally, we want to achieve abstinence because we don't want to keep that neuropathway active. Because what ends up happening is the brain says, that got me to the barn, but it didn't quite get me to the barn fast enough, good enough. It didn't feel quite the same as I really, really want it to feel. And so eventually, while we may be able to get to the barn in another way, if that pathway though is still active, like we will go back to kind of the most effective way to get to the barn, which is usually psychoactive substances. Some behaviors may benefit from a period of sobriety, followed by reintroduction in a way that does not follow the old neuropathways. So basically, we're not using the behavior as a coping strategy. And the gal that mentioned that was talking about using behaviors to gain a sense of control in your life, like, yeah, are we using them as like a healthy form of self-care, or are we using them like in a really compulsive, out of control sort of way? So the key is we want to create new neural pathways, right? By addressing the underlying trauma and nervous system dysregulation. We have to find a new, healthier way to get to the barn. So, which is ventral vagal, which is safety. Alrighty, let's see here. Polyvagal informed interventions. So, like I mentioned earlier, our most powerful intervention is our own regulated nervous system. I did have this wonderful opportunity to do a workshop with Deb Dana, a polyvagal workshop here in Salt Lake City several years ago. And she talked a lot about this, like how can we show up with our clients in as regulated of a space as possible. And while we're human, right, we have our own stressors, we have our own trauma, we have our own stuff that we're dealing with. Maybe we aren't fully in ventral, but we're still anchored. She talks about this concept of being anchored in ventral, where like, even though like for me, for example, giving this presentation and lots of nervousness going into it, I was still anchored in ventral, right? I still knew, okay, I'm in my home, I'm safe. I can hear my dog over here snoring. And that's like keeping me grounded, right, in this ventral place. So while we may not be completely and totally in ventral, as long as we can show up anchored in that, that can have a huge impact for our clients. We want to utilize the power of co-regulation. So definitely encouraging our clients to attend groups, 12-step fellowships, to find their community of people. This is so important. And this is probably why there is so much effectiveness behind 12-step type of programs and group therapy, is because of this co-regulation piece. We want to address the underlying trauma using whatever trauma-specific modality you're trained in. And then remember that accessing ventral vagal in someone who has been in survival states for a really long time can be incredibly uncomfortable. There is this quote, and I don't know who it's attributed to. You kind of see it a lot like in pop psychology. But it says, our nervous system will always choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. And that is incredibly true. Like, even though it is absolutely miserable and stressful to be stuck in that state of sympathetic activation or dorsal vagal shutdown. Like that is what we know. That's what our nervous system knows, and that will be its default. Like that's what it will choose time and time again over like the potential of going into like this unfamiliar territory, even if there is a potential that that could be our heaven. So just know when we're working with clients that don't really have access to this ventral vagal space, that we have to go really slow and be really patient with the process. But the more that they're able to start accessing ventral, even if just for seconds at a time, like we are reshaping their nervous system. So again, story follows state. So we want to reinforce stories of safety. This is where that cognitive piece really comes in. We want to challenge the old stories and the new narratives. We want to do the reprocessing and rewrite new stories. But this is really important right here, is we are not convincing our clients into believing that they are safe when they are not. So especially in today's political and cultural climate, many of our clients are in fact not safe. And so we do not want to like gaslight them into thinking, okay, you're safe, because they're not safe, they're not safe. And so we need to work within that reality. And I think this is where we can really, where safety comes from for these clients is connection and belonging to safe communities. And sometimes safe enough is enough. Like that's where we have to land and just be okay with just creating an environment that is safe enough. All right, let's see. Oh, this is a really cool thing that I want to share. One thing that I would see a lot in residential treatment is clients come in super dysregulated. Usually, if you're coming into residential treatment, most of them were in dorsal vagal shutdown. Lots of despair, suicidal ideation, that sort of thing. They come into residential treatment and they're there for, it's usually about the 2-3 week mark, and they're like freaking out because they're anxious now. So much anxiety. And they're like, there's no way, I'm not getting better. This place is actually making me worse. Like I am anxious. It feels like I'm getting worse. This is not helping. I need to get out of here. Well, what we know, right, with our nervous system is if you are anxious, right, you are in your sympathetic nervous system. And so these clients have actually had a nervous system state change. They have gone from dorsal, they are now in sympathetic, and they're actually closer to where they're trying to get. So that sympathetic activation for our chronically shut down clients is that's the next step on the ladder. And that is also intolerable and distressing, but just reminding them like you're closer to where you're trying to get than you've probably ever been in your life. So I think that's just really cool. Okay, hold on. Nope, we're ready. So these are just kind of in the moment interventions that we can do working with clients in their different nervous system states. So the key thing when we're working with dorsal vagal is movement, and it's gentle movement, right? Because they are immobilized, we're trying to get some sort of mobilization online, because like, right, once a body's in motion, it's more likely to stay in motion. So that gentle movement, where the goal is to kind of start moving them towards sympathetic activation. Because then once we can get that sympathetic activation online, then we can start kind of pulling out of that state. But I will say the gentle part is really important. So how often, right, do our clients go to the doctor? They're struggling with depression and then they get prescribed exercise, right? So you have a client basically that is in a dorsal vagal state. The doctor says, okay, go exercise. And then what does the client do? They go to the gym and they hop on the treadmill and just like absolutely run themselves into the ground. And their body's like, no, absolutely not. This is the whole reason why we were in dorsal in the first place, and shuts them down even more. And so we are not encouraging our clients to go out and hop on the treadmill in response to dorsal vagal activity or dorsal vagal shutdown. We really just want to gently introduce movement in a way that can kind of slowly start activating, getting that sympathetic energy online. So for some clients, especially our highly dissociated clients, it might just look like wiggling fingers and toes, moving wrists. It might be encouraging them to mosey, just get up and just wander around the house. Do a simple chore. We're not talking about cleaning the whole house, like something simple, like put away a couple dishes. Rhythmic movement can be really powerful. So a rocking chair, hammock, swing, like light, gentle self-touch. So tickles, that hand over the heart can feel really soothing. The self-hug, gentle stretching. I love this one, the visualizing movement. So our brain is, for all of its amazing capabilities, a lot of times it doesn't know the difference between what we imagine and what is real. So even just visualizing, helping them visualize what they want to do. So if the chore is to go shower, let's visualize what that looks like. Like visualize yourself sitting up. Visualize yourself walking to the bathroom. Visualize yourself like the water from the shower. So like just the visualization can start to activate those motor neurons of the sympathetic nervous system, which is really cool. Then we got just our usual grounding exercises, which kind of helps pull out of the dissociation, kind of brings us into the present moment. If they're up for it, restorative yoga is incredibly powerful. And then again, connection with safe others. All right, let's go into strategies for sympathetic. All right, so box breathing. For those of you that don't know, that's like basically like find maybe a window frame or a door frame and just follow your breathing as you trace. Like breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. But breathing is huge for sympathetic activation, because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to reduce the activation. So we're not trying to calm down, we're calming up. We're trying to calm up the ladder up into ventral. So yeah, we're just anything to reduce that energetic activation. There's the physiological side. This is a big one that we used in the treatment center that I was at. I believe Andrew Huberman may or may not have developed it. I think it was him. But basically, or he identified it. I don't know. But basically the concept is this, and we can all do it together. Super fun. Get a nice little free buzz in your head for a minute. So basically it's a deep breath in, followed by when you think you can't breathe in anymore, you take another breath in, followed by a long, slow exhale through the mouth. So let's just do it together just for fun. So big breath in, followed by another one in. Long, slow breath out. I should have done this before I started the presentation. Let's do it one more time. So another big, deep breath in, followed by one more. And usually like a couple of those, you don't want to do too many because you'll probably start to get lightheaded, but a couple of those can be really powerful right at that moment where someone drops into fight or flight. So it can buy them time, maybe just a few seconds to choose how they're going to respond. So this is really good for just like immediate like dysregulation, fight or flight, super triggered in the moment. Like how do we like quickly get them kind of grounded enough so they can choose their next response. Vocalizations, these are really cool. Singing, humming, chanting, whistling. And the reason why this is so effective is because we have, remember all those nerve endings that we have from our ventral vagal coming up into our face. So this can activate those ventral vagal nerves. I remember my mom talking about going through a really hard time where she was just very, 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 very stressed going through divorce. And she's like, I don't know, it's the weirdest thing. I just find myself humming everywhere I go. And like, how cool was that? Like she was just naturally regulating her nervous system through humming. Splashing cold water on the face, like anything to do with the face can really just be grounding for a sympathetic nervous system. A short burst of cardio. So here's where cardio can be helpful. Like remember when we're in sympathetic, our heart rate is elevated. So let's say we go hop on the treadmill for 5 minutes, we kind of 10 minutes get our heart rate up. Then when we step off, it kind of activates our body's natural like reset and back to homeostasis. So we're kind of like tricking it into, okay, we ran, danger's over. Now let's calm back down. Snuggling a pet, very grounding, and which can also be good in dorsal vagal as well. Creativity. I'm engaging in some sort of creative exercise, help get that right brain on board, can help be calming and soothing. And then again, connection with safe others. All right, let's go into our next slide here. So assessment strategies. So again, we're focusing on the big picture, and really we're looking at the intersection between the client's lived experiences, their trauma, how they coped as a child, how they cope now, and their nervous system profile. So we're looking like how all of these things are interacting with each other. So beyond like the usual, substance use type of assessments, these are things that I like to incorporate in my work with clients, just because it gives me a little bit more information that I feel is really helpful in this type of work. So I give every client the adverse childhood experiences and get their ACE score, but really I'm not so much interested in the score as I am the specific questions that they endorse, that they marked yes to, because I want to find out, okay, so what was it like having a mom that was severely depressed? Like, how did the whole family navigate that? How did you cope with that? Like, how were your needs met when mom was depressed? So things like that. Our attachment style, I think, can be really helpful in kind of understanding really how we kind of points us to how we regulate our nervous system. So like our anxiously attached clients are probably more likely to try and reach out to others to regulate. So their relationships are going to be a huge part of their regulation strategies. Whereas like our avoidant clients are going to be more likely to maybe engage in more internally driven processes for regulation. The biopsychosocial, super valuable, not just something that we give just to give for insurance purposes or whatever, but really there's so much valuable information in there that can really help understand like the trauma picture, especially like our systemic trauma and our intergenerational type of trauma. And then I love to do like a addiction compulsive behavior timeline, like really getting the whole big picture, like starting from as far back as you can remember, and just having them map out, okay, if I wasn't engaging in substances, I was compulsively seeking relationships, and just being able to map that all out can really help you see like that whole big picture. Obviously, a comprehensive substance use history is important. And then I love the personal autonomic profile map, really for two reasons. Kind of helps me understand like what their default nervous system states are, but also helps the client develop language around how to talk about what's going on. And then how do they cope? How did they cope as a kid? How do they cope now when they're stressed out? Like, do they go exercise or do they hop on their phone and doom scroll? All right, and then let's see here. Some resources. So again, please, you are welcome to email me. I love to connect, and I'm happy to consult as well on any addiction cases that you would want to talk about. This first link is to Dr. and I'm going to try and put it in the chat. I just have to figure out how to do that. But it's a presentation that Dr. Kevin McCauley does, and I would show it often to family group. So for the clients and the family members, it's very much on the neuroscience of addiction. He does a really great job, again, very much like the molecular stuff going on in the brain. But again, the clients are really receptive to that because they're like, oh, there's actually a scientific explanation to what's going on with me. And then the next link is to it's a free PDF on on nervous system regulating activities. A lot of them that I already mentioned, but it kind of really goes into explaining detail step by step how to do that. And then these are the books that I've referenced throughout the presentation. This Anchored by Deb Dana is really good for the clients. So there's very good explanation on the nervous system, gives them exercises that they can do for different nervous system states. Like it's very much written for the lay person. Whereas like she's got these other books like this Polyvagal Theory and Therapy is definitely more geared towards therapists. And let's see here. Okay. I'm going to put those links in the chat. I don't know how. I'll figure it out. Give me 1 second, you guys. And then we'll move to questions.
I was going to say, if you want to just leave that up, I can type them in and put in the chat while you're answering questions.
Just seems so difficult.
I can give it a try.
All right. I'll just leave it up. Okay. Let me know when you're done and then I'll stop sharing my screen. In the meantime, any questions? Our brain's fried. So much information. Just feel free to unmute yourself and chime in.
There were a few in the chat if you want to just ask in person for those people that put them in the chat.
Says, do you have a link for the personal autonomic map? Did you add that already?
I did not.
Okay. Let me see here. Let me see if I can do that. I will add that to the chat. Just give me a second.
This last link is not coming up. I don't know if there's something off with it, but it's not coming up.
Let me see if I can figure that out. Here we go. So I think I can put that last link in the chat. I got it to pull up, so. So there's that. Let me see if I can get you guys the autonomic profile map. And that was also, just so you know, that was sent out in an email from Kelly, I believe on Monday. But I'm happy to put it in there again. Just give me 1 second.
Oh, that one. I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was the handout. Yes, I did put that in the chat for you guys several times. So.
Okay. Let's see here.
One of the questions somebody gave in the chat is, how is abstinence different from deprivation?
That's a good question. So I think it's all kind of the psychological process behind it. You know, it's one thing to not engage in a behavior, you know, because it's not healthy for you. It's another thing when you're engaging, like you're hyper focused on it, it's compulsive, it's like you can't not do it. Like where you feel like, and if you're getting some sort of, you know, some high off it, some sense of superiority off of it. So I think, so there's that piece to it. And it is really tricky when we're talking about behaviors. Like, you know, we don't want to go into that deprivation piece with behaviors that we do that are an important part of our functioning, whether it's our sexuality, whether it's our, you know, eating, whether it's, you know, we have to be able to spend money, you know, we have to be able to do these things. So we have to definitely be careful on how we manage those behaviors when they're out of control, because we don't want them to go into that place of deprivation. Let's see. Did that help? All right. All righty. Okay, I think that's all.
I'm going back. There were a couple of questions. Let's see. Where did it go? Somebody asked, can you tell us the quote again about heaven and hell and the reference for that?
Yeah, so our nervous system will always choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. Our nervous system will always choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven.
And what are your thoughts or opinions on MAT?
So I kind of briefly mentioned this. It for many of our clients is necessary. Like it's just, if that's harm reduction has its place, and if that's as far as we can get, that's as far as we get. So it certainly has its place. I've seen phenomenal results with it. People finally able to get a handle on their substance use through MAT. I do struggle with the idea of staying on, these drugs indefinitely. But again, if that keeps people from, blowing up their lives and allows them to go to work and have relationships with their family members, then like that matters. So all the above. I feel all the things about it.
Somebody also asked, when you were talking about going through the different things that we can do, they put in the chat and asked about what about the disorganized attachment client?
Let's see here. So I think with these clients, we're going to see just extremely dysregulated nervous systems, right? We're going to see sympathetic. We're going to see probably the clients that are going back and forth. They're sympathetic, they're dorsal, they're all over the place. Again, that's not sustainable for a long period of time. Eventually, the end result of all of this without like effective intervention and treatment for clients is eventually they're going to end up in that dorsal vagal shutdown because our bodies just cannot sustain sympathetic activation for indefinitely, or the swings, the back and forth. So I would say, like, especially in my own experience with disorganized clients, there's definitely anything and everything, any strategy to help regulate, like it feels very desperate, grasping at straws, anything and everything that they can do to regulate.
All right, I asked a question about groups and I just have kids around me, so I can't speak. I have it in the chat.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, you keep mentioning groups. I'm curious if you feel like it's more effective to teach this with group versus individual therapy. Like if people learn more in a group, and how do you structure a group for this? Do you have one just on learning to regulate with a polyvagal lens, and how many weeks is it? Or do you teach it as part of a therapeutic processing group? Or is it a support group? So this is the first time I've ever talked about the addiction neuropathway piece. So you guys are hearing this for the very first time from me. But the polyvagal part, usually that, I mean, it can definitely be done individual, but I think it is really powerful in a group setting, especially because there is that co-regulation piece. But it is so involved and it can take a lot of time, where I've easily spent, like 4 or 5 groups going through all these different aspects. So starting with the psychoeducation, going into different, a whole group just doing that autonomic profile, doing a whole group on different regulating strategies. So definitely I see the benefit in doing it as a group. Is very well, it fits group therapy well, but you can certainly do any of this like one-on-one with your clients. It can be both. But I'm happy to consult with you on this, and if you want to shoot me an email, I'd love to talk more about it because I love to talk about this stuff. So reach out, Rachel.
Thank you.
I think I don't see any other questions unless I missed something. So if I did, pipe up now, but Thank you. I just want to thank you, Hayley. This has been so great. I've been writing notes and trying to do everything at the same time. And so I definitely want to go back and pull some things from this, from the recording. But this has been amazing. Such good information and great applicable, information that we can use with clients and with family members or whoever we have, that's dealing with this situation. So I really, really appreciate you being here with us, and I appreciate your vulnerability. And I know we've had some comments in the chat as well about just it's wonderful to hear people's experiences, personally, and how you have gone through this and what you learned. So appreciate that.
I'm going to stay on for a minute to double chat because there's some stuff. So if anybody wants to stay on and ask me questions for a minute, I'm fine with that. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, even though I ghosted you for like a whole week when I agreed to do that.
No. It's okay. We talked about that. We're good.
All right.
So,
well, yeah, and thank you, everyone. You guys have been great. I really appreciate it.
and just as a reminder, you guys grab that link in the chat so that you can get your evaluations. I'll be getting the slides from Hayley, so we will be sending those out with the certificate next week. So I know several of you have asked about that, and yeah, just get that link. Make sure you submit it before Friday, end of day. If you have any issues, please email Gabby so that she can help you with that before the end of Friday, because then that link goes away after Friday and you have to go through other stuff to get your certificate, and you don't want to do that. So we really appreciate you guys supporting us and showing up, and hopefully you can be with us next month and we'll have another great training. So thank you all. Thanks, Hayley.
Yep.
Hey, Hayley, just a question. What is the best way to contact you?
So my email, Hayley, here, I'll just put it in the chat real quick.
Okay.
So Hayley@cliffrosetherapy.com. There you go.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, guys, I'm going to hop off. Thank you.